Hey, this is Joe Hubbard from JoeHubbardBassVideos.com, coming at you today with another bass lesson. And today's lesson is on left-hand technique. Let's go ahead and start this lesson by breaking down the components of music. This is what to play. We have to understand that the music is broken down into these various components, which really go under 5 main headings. We have melody, we have harmony, we have rhythm, we have counterpoint, and we have form. These are the main components of music, and this is what we're playing. When we play melodies. When we play over harmony. When we play rhythmically. When we play counterpoint all the time. This just means 2 simultaneous things happening at once. I could be playing a walking bass line and a sax player could be playing a solo over that. That's counterpoint. So I could be playing a groove and a drummer could be playing something that's opposing what I'm accenting with his kick drum, and there's some counterpoint that's there. Form is also what we play all the time because that's the structure of the songs that we're playing or the improvisations that we're playing. It's all related into those 5 headings. So that is what to play. Now, what we have to define here is how are we going to do that? Now, we've chosen the bass guitar to play those things that we've just talked about, the melody, the harmony, the rhythm, the counterpoint, and the form. So the very first thing that is going to teach you how to do this is developing the proper technique on the instrument. It just goes without saying that this is what it is. If I don't know physically how to put my hands on the instrument that's going to enable me to play the things that I hear in my head, then I really am going to be way behind the curve with the whole thing. Now, you can always hire someone to play your music. You might hear great music in your head, but you can't play it. You can always hire a good bass player to come in and play it for you. But ultimately, the goal of these lessons is to teach you how to become the player and you to be able to play what you hear in your head. So technique is on the top of the list, and what happens within technique is understanding all the things that are affected by a good technique. Dynamics and articulation are completely affected by having a good technique. I won't be able to play with the right dynamics and the right articulation unless my technique is together. I won't be able to have a good tone on my instrument. Now, we talk about the electric instrument and we talk about the idea that within this circuitry here of the pickups and the actual circuit that I have in my bass, I can alter the tone to a certain degree with the affecting the mid-range, the treble, and the bass. But this is also an acoustic instrument. This is what a lot of people don't realize. If I unplug and play acoustically, you can still hear the pitches. It's not like an electric piano or keyboard, where if I unplug that and play that acoustically, there's no sound at all, there's no pitch. So this has acoustic properties to it, and to get the right kind of tone out of the instrument, we have to have the right technique developed. Your time and feel is developed by the technique that you develop on the instrument. If you don't have any technique, you'll never be able to play properly in time because it will be the technique that will be holding you back. I've actually had a lot of students who've come to me and have said, yeah, my timing's not very good and I need lessons. And I've then drilled them on some timing issues and realized that their conception of time wasn't that bad. What it was they had no technique on the instrument, so how could you possibly play in time? It just makes perfect sense once you put it in that sort of context. And this wraps it up to the fluency of playing what you hear can only be achieved to a decent level by having a good level of technique. And it's always going to be within the parameters of you know, the difficulty of the music you're playing. If you're always playing Happy Birthday to You or Mary Had a Little Lamb, then you might not need as much technique as if you were going to play Giant Steps by John Coltrane, and there's lots of divisions in between. So you have to decide with the music you're playing to the degree that you want to develop your technique. So we're talking about technique. We're going to start with our left hand. And this is really the business end of the instrument, because all of the harmonic and melodic content really comes from our left hand and the combinations of notes that we play with that. So what we want to start with is understanding how to fret the notes. And the notes are fretted with the fingertips, not the flats of the fingers. I do not want to play flat-fingered. I want to play with the tips of my fingers. In order to achieve that, I need to curl my knuckles. The body is made up of a series of levers and hinges. If you look at the way the body works, the levers at the knuckles, at the wrists, at the elbow, at the shoulder, at the hips, at the knees, at the ankles. That's what it's all about. So to induce this proper technique, I need to bend those levers at the knuckles, so I'm really playing like this. Now, here's what happens is that sometimes people, especially when playing up on the G string, they might be playing a group of 3 notes across here, and their little finger disappears under the bass. So they might be playing with their first finger, and their whole hand disappears behind the neck. You don't want that to happen. You want to keep the fingers curved and close to the fretboard at all times. This is extremely important. So the thumb should be behind the neck, relaxed and riding up and down near the center of the neck. Never hang your thumb over the bass like this. This is bad. This cramps your left hand and reduces the notes that you can play. So if I have my hand like this, you can see I've got a greater span to reach, and it gives me a lot more control and fluidity to play what I want to hear through my instrument. I want the thumb and the second finger to be in some sort of alignment. So if you look at that, you can see that my thumb and my second finger are in some sort of alignment. This makes for very good technique, and remember, affects the tone in various different ways. You want to adopt a 1 finger per fret position, and you want to fret the note at the fret. This is where the notes are. They're right just below the fret is where you want to fret the note. And adopting the 1 finger per fret position allows you to understand the spatial relationship all over your instruments between the frets. In other words, the lower I play, the spatial relationship gets a bit wider. As I go up the bass, the spatial relationship starts to become shorter. And once I'm right up here, it's a lot shorter than it is here. So I need to understand this so it gets into my muscle memory so I have consistency across my entire fretboard with all the note groupings that I'm playing. You've got to also understand that the wrist really needs to be straight. I don't want to bend this lever too much, and the reason is because the muscles that govern the movement of the fingers are in your forearm. And all you have to do is wiggle. You might not pick that up on the camera, but if you wiggle your fingers and your fingers, you'll see the muscles in your forearm moving. Now, I equate this to the garden hose, because if you take a garden hose and you turned on the tap, the water would come out of the garden hose. If I took the hose and then bent it, water would still come out, but it wouldn't be as forceful. There wouldn't be the right amount of pressure. This is what you're going to get when you keep bending the wrist of the left hand, or the right hand for that matter. And what happens is this can lead to problems with your tendons. The sheaths that are surrounding the tendons and ligaments that connect to your bones and muscles, this is compromised by this constant bending of the wrist. So what you want to do is strive to keep the left hand wrist as straight as possible. Now, across the instrument, this happens in various different ways. As I move further down my instrument, in the lowest position, it's going to induce a little bit of a arch in my wrist. Now, if I'm standing and I'm sitting right now, and you can see that my bass is resting here on my leg, if I'm going to be sitting and playing, and this is the way I play when I sit, I've got to compromise a little bit on the wrist bend. Most of the time when I perform standing. Some people, when they sit, they rearrange their bass so it's more like what they would have if they're playing in a standing position. But if you see this concept here, that if I am standing and I'm playing and my bass is kind of perpendicular to the floor, what happens is that I want to you can see the wrist bend there is pretty great. The further I move this towards my head, the further that I take that wrist bend out of the equation. Now I can do this in a sitting position, and I can also do this in a standing position, probably more effectively in the standing position, because where the body tends to balance is a little bit more into the center. But note that is very bent there, and I just move that closer to my headstock closer to my head, and that tends to get rid of that. You see this a lot in the technique of a lot of heavy metal bass players these days who are buying 5 strings to adhere to the drop C tuning that goes along with a lot of death metal bands. They have the guitarists who tuning their low E's down to C's, and then the bass players want to do the same thing, but they don't want to just keep doing that detuning thing because it sounds really floppy, you know, on the electric bass. So they buy a 5 string and they're playing on that low C. And you see most metal bass players play with this kind of technique. You know, it's almost like an upright bass because they're down in that low position for a long amount of time, and that takes its toll on the wrist if it's bent all the time like that. So that's what you want to strive for, is keeping that wrist as straight as possible. Put all of these concepts into play when you're practicing. A great way to implement this is through practicing in a mirror. This is a really good thing. Now, let's look at combinations of left-hand fingers. We basically have 4 combinations of one finger at a time. That would be anything with your first finger, the second finger, the third finger, and the fourth finger. For 2-finger combinations, I've got 6 different ways I can move 2 fingers, okay? That is 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 4, 2, 3, 2, 4, and then 3, 4. For 3-finger combinations, I've got 4 different ways I can combine the 3 fingers of the left hand, and then I've got 24 different ways that I can combine the 4 fingers. In further lesson, I'm going to show you all these finger permutations that you can practice. But just for now, understand that when you're playing anything on your bass, there's basically 2 principles of left-hand movement, and that is that I'm playing note groupings that would be made up of either each individual finger, combinations of 2 fingers, combinations of 3 fingers, combinations of 4 fingers. And I'm either playing them in a vertical position across the bass, or I'm shifting horizontally from position to position. And these are the 2 basic principles. Now, when I'm thinking about those note groupings in whatever position that I happen to find myself in, what happens is that I'm going to be playing either one of 4 of those different combinations of 1 finger, 2 fingers, 3 fingers, or 4 fingers. And there's lots of subdivisions of those and permutations that we can take a look at. And what happens is that what I want to do is always keep my fingers down onto the fretboard behind a fretted note. So if I have 1 that goes to 2, I want 1 to stay down. I don't want 1 to come off the board. If I have 1 that goes to 3, I want 1 and 2 to stay down onto the fretboard. If I have 1 that goes to 4, I want 1, 2, and 3 to be down behind 4. Okay? So it doesn't matter what it is. If it's 2 to 4, 2, 1 stays down behind 2, and then when 4 goes down, they're all down. And that's the way that it needs to be. So when I play a scale, I'd have something like this. And I play that scale, and all my fingers are down onto the fretboard. What I don't have is fingers sticking off the board. The classic thing is where you have to play with the second finger, the first finger's off the board, I go to my little finger and my third finger's off the board. I don't want that. I want to keep them all as close to possible. This is the way you're going to develop the ultimate fluidity across the instrument and consistency across the instrument. Now you go practice.